Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, I just finished my third build in Path of Exile 2's early access after 2 weeks of playing. So far, it's been great. I've been enjoying it, but I feel like as though I'm kind of in a weird niche position as I haven't looked at anyone's guide. I haven't looked at anyone's content in general. I have been trying to keep myself away from other people's stuff, mainly because I wanted to go in fresh and blind without knowing too much what other people are doing. The most that I know of are what has been nerfed and buffed in the patch notes, and also as well, I edit for 2 people on YouTube, so I've seen a full Acolyte of Chayula monk build in Endgame, and I've seen a full minion build in Endgame, and that's the extent of my knowledge. Like, I have a few ideas of like what other people are playing, but I don't understand the mechanics under it, so I have been building blind for the most part. And so far, I'll say it's been pretty easy, all things considered. If you were to compare it to Path of Exile 1, the build crafting, it is still as in-depth as PoE 1, I think, for a lot of people anyways, but the complexity to start has been significantly less, and that's been for just one gigantic reason. We have the ability to see damage numbers in game now. As you can see in the background, you can hit a boss and actually see your damage numbers. This is absurdly important. It's actually one of the secrets of why, if you don't know, I've been playing Last Epoch for like 4 years straight. I was like one of the bigger people covering Last Epoch, and I was able to make my own builds and my own content because I can actually see numbers as I'm playing with them. And just having access to the numbers in game where I can change my build, change passive nodes, mess around with my damage and stuff like that, and see, is this better, is that better? Just having that option, that tool, is enough to be able to actually read through the nodes and figure out how to play your build and how to set up your build, because without that, it's much harder. So I could imagine if Path of Exile 1 had the same thing going on, you wouldn't need PoB as much. Like, you could play without PoB, but PoB just simply gives us that ability to see our damage numbers that we normally couldn't see in game. So that has been one of the craziest things that has come in Path of Exile 2 that has just allowed me to actually play the game without needing to look into a bunch of external resources. So that's great. Now, like I said, I got to Endgame with 3 different builds. Let's talk about them. The first one is going to be a Stormweaver. I played a Stormweaver. That's actually the ascendancy that caught my eye the most, not because of the Archmage nonsense that everyone's doing, but because of the storms that you can apply on the ground, and like they sit there and you can make them big, and you can apply cooldown recovery speed on them and get a bunch of storms. That was fun. I haven't updated that build since I played it, and that's just mainly because, you know, this is a beta. I want to try other stuff. That's the whole point of this early access thing, is for me to try a bunch of different builds. So we moved on from that. That build was great. It was tanky enough, mainly because of energy shield, but great. It did enough damage. Cool. Next build, I tried a lightning warp witch hunter. This was a very interesting build, mainly because I had really good clear, because just Witch Hunter in general. Lightning Warp also is a pretty good clear skill, all things considered. Like, if I were to take a build where I would push into Breach more and more and more, I would definitely choose the Witch Hunter, as Breach has just felt so smooth in comparison to the other 2 characters that I've played so far. Specifically, the next one we're going to be talking about, which is the triple cock Blood Mage Spark Invoker. This build, oh boy, I've been falling in love with this build. It's actually the build I've been putting the most effort into out of the 3, mainly because I've just enjoyed it so much. I'm pretty sure it's going to get nerfed into the ground, or at least portions of the build, specifically Spark, if you're wondering. Spark is probably going to get nerfed into the ground. That's actually why I'm pretty much done with this character, other than I'm going to farm a bunch of currency and then play my next character, which I have pretty good ideas of what I want to play, but we're going to dump this character eventually because I'm pretty sure Spark's going to get nerfed into the ground. So no point in, you know, trying to play something that's already dead in the water, which we're pretty sure Spark is going to get. Like, and if you're wondering why, it's because Spark has more ways of scaling than other builds do, if that makes sense. So Spark can scale with skill factoration. The longer the sparks are out for, the more they can hit multiple targets, especially on single target. The more projectile speed you have on Spark, right? It means you can hit more targets quicker, more frequently, especially with the skill factoration, right? And then, of course, you can do all the other layers of scaling like cast speed, levels, damage percent, crit damage. All of these other ways on top of the skill factoration and the projectile speed is probably what is going to get changed in some way. Probably just the base gem itself. I don't know why it's giving, like, I don't know why with quality you can get to like 20 sparks per cast, especially with how well it scales with the skill factoration and projectile speed. So we'll see what happens. Like I said, I know that there's a lot of other builds that are broken on the market right now. Like I've heard a lot about Deadeye, right? Obviously, you know, Deadeye being very strong with some, you know, what is it called? Like Herald, like chains and stuff like that. I've heard ruminations of that, but I haven't dug too deep into it. So I know that there's other stuff that is probably going to get nerfed, but I'm pretty sure if they're going to move through the beta, eventually Spark is going to get nerfed, because I tried all the other skills that at my I could access and stuff like that, and definitely Spark was one of the best ones for cast on crit, unfortunately. Yeah, I've played 3 builds to Endgame. All 3 of them were great. I enjoyed them. Now, how do I feel about the game overall after playing it without too much knowledge of what other people are doing? The one thing I will note is I am very well aware of the imbalance between having rarity on your gear and character and not having it. If you haven't watched, Sir God made a video talking about it recently, and rarity can make you have a lot more drops in general, and that will allow you to, you know, snowball your currency making. I kind of tried to stay away from rarity when I could, mainly because I'm pretty sure it's going to get removed. So just, that's another thing I did, was I tried to avoid rarity. Like, I play enough of the video game that making money is not a problem. Like, for instance, I think I made like 20 divines today just by trying to craft my staff. That I'm currently running on the Invoker. Like, if you actually care about crafting your own gear and stuff like that, money is not a problem. Money is definitely not a problem. So I haven't really needed to rarity spam, but cool, right? But yeah, what are some of the imbalances that I've seen so far in the game after just playing it in general? I think that the base amount of life that you get as a character is not high enough to compete with Energy Shield. If they were to keep Energy Shield in the current state that it is, life would need to get doubled, I think. Mainly due to the fact that there are certain things that you can't mitigate as easily on just a life-based character, okay? The main thing I'm going to point out is enemies that explode corpses. If you don't know, Detonate Dead has received a change. The biggest change with Detonate Dead is it no longer deals fire damage in Path of Exile 2. It deals physical damage with the explosion. And that's a big problem, mainly because most of our mitigation to, you know, Detonate Dead effects in Path of Exile 1 were just scaling elemental resistance and stuff like that, and max LE res, less elemental damage taken. It wasn't that big of a problem. But now that the explosions actually scale on Fizz, that's a big problem. Even with a decent smattering of armor scaling and stuff like that, the explosions do so much damage that I feel almost forced into playing non-life builds in general in Endgame because of this. Not everything else. Everything else I can mitigate. I can mitigate chaos damage. I can mitigate I can mitigate elemental damage fine. I can mitigate all these other damage types just by running normal defenses like evasion, armor, and stuff like that. But the only one I can't deal with in a way that is indicative of good build design is, of course, the Fizz explosion. So if they could either nerf the Fizz explosions, I could say life would be on a much better place in general, because you wouldn't be dying out of the blue, right? But I think life could, like, for instance, right now I'm at 2.2k life. I've good life on all my gear and stuff like that, that could easily be 3k, and it would not be as overpowered as like all the energy shield stuff running around. If they were to choose to not nerf energy shield, that would be the way I would go about it. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to talk about is, after playing some cast on freeze, cast on shock, cast on crit things, the biggest problem I have is there is not really an alternative of this for weapon based builds. And what do I mean by that? Well, because of the way that they have changed the trigger gems from PoE 1 to PoE 2, specifically, cast on crit, I'm going to name here mostly, it is not a good idea to run a cast on crit attack with a spell. And why is that? Well, because you can run spells with cast on crit now in general. That's what I'm doing with my current character, cast on crit spark, right? And the problem with this becomes, if you don't know, there's actually a little blurb on cast on crit that states that you gain power based on the power of the enemy on top of the enemy threshold of their ailment threshold. So for instance, every enemy in the game has like an ailment threshold. The bigger hit you do with the crit, the more power you're going to get. Since I am scaling spell damage, right, and spell crit, my cast on crit is going to give me a very large amount of energy, as you can see in the footage. But the problem is, if I were to play an attack, let's say I want to play like a bow cast on crit build, kind of like Mathel, used to do in PoE 1, right? Let's say I want to do that. I would need to scale my bow damage on top of scaling my flat spell damage at the same time, because you need to hit hard enough to apply the power, and then of course then that power then triggers the spell. So it makes no sense whatsoever to try to actually do cast on crit as an attack build, because what's the point in scaling both your stuff when you could just scale, like, let's say spark, and have it do a cast on crit and stuff like that. So either weapons would have to have much better stats in general, it'd have to be way easier to get attack speed on them, or it would have to be way easier to cap crit on them, which I know is not the case, right? So there's no benefit to running cast on crit on like a melee or like a range build. Maybe we'll see skills in the future that can make it better, but as I was doing some schmoozing and trying to figure out what skill would be best on this cast on crit character, that's something like the imbalance of the trigger skills is kind of just out of whack in general. Like, I think that could be looked at again. I think cast on crit doesn't need the ailment threshold thing. It should just be a flat amount on crit, so that attack crit cast on crit builds can actually exist. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents in that regard. And that's going to be it for my biggest gripes with Path of Exile 2. There's a few other things from someone who has been playing without looking at other people's content, but those are the most things. The biggest other thing I would say is, I don't like how rare this, like, not rare, but how annoying it is to find the citadels with the map UI the way it is. But that could be fixed if the map UI wasn't like doggy do, right? If like the Atlas UI wasn't dog, if they could fix that, that'd be great. But like, that's not like I'm gonna quit the game kind of level of thing. But I do definitely agree that the life versus ES balance is all over the place currently. Now, all that being said, this has been Dread. Off to go do something else. Bye.